Garv Malcolm and Minister Byrne, thank you very much for being here to take this very, very emotive and very, very important subject matter as a motion. I think that it's appropriate that the first PMB is around Gaza. The last motion that we had as a House, and I really want to commend Senator McDougall for all the work that he put into compiling a motion and consulting with all sides of the House to ensure that we as a House stood firm on the side of the people in Palestine and condemned in the strongest possible ways the absolutely shocking actions of Israel and of Netanyahu. And that was the very last motion that we had in this House before recess. So this is the first PMB. It's very, very sad that we have to concentrate and focus all of our emotions and our energies on this absolutely horrific situation which continues to unfold and which continues to get worse all the time. But that's what we within the Fianna Fáil party decided to do. There are obviously a lot of national issues that we could have used this time for, but we want to show that our hearts and our souls and our minds are with the people of Gaza and what they are undergoing. So when we look back in relation to Gaza and in relation to the two-state solution that has been proposed, and it's really heartwarming to see even over the last 7 days the number of European countries that have come on board, and of course the UK also. I think it's important to note that Ireland and our governments have played a very consistent and vocal role in supporting the two-state solution for Israel and Palestine. And in fact, Ireland, and it was then Minister for Foreign Affairs Brian Lenihan who became the very first EU member state to declare in 1980 that peace in the Middle East must be based on a fully sovereign Palestinian state coexisting with Israel. And Ireland has long prioritised the Middle East peace process in foreign policy. And as a country, we have consistently supported international efforts to restart negotiations, and we have always condemned human rights violations in the occupied Palestinian territories. And that is pre the 7th of October and what has happened there. So in 2024, Ireland formally recognised the state of Palestine, joining other EU countries like Spain and Slovenia. And this move was hailed by Palestinian leaders as historic and deeply meaningful. And meeting the Palestinian ambassador here recently, she was very, very clear that the Palestinian people themselves know all about Ireland, and they absolutely appreciate all the efforts that Ireland are making, that the Taoiseach is making, that the Taoiseach is making to support these people who have so little and so little hope. Only yesterday, the Taoiseach delivered a very powerful speech reaffirming Ireland's support for the two-state solution. And he warned yesterday that the opportunity for peace may vanish without urgent global action. Every country in the world needs to take an interest and needs to stand up for what's right. And again, he condemned the humanitarian crisis in Gaza as a genocide being carried out in plain sight. So our motion recognises the absolute horror of the war and famine being inflicted on the people of Gaza, and the absolute need for an immediate ceasefire to allow for food and aid to be delivered, and also, of course, for the hostages to be released. And we've consistently called for that for over the last 23 months. And the key priorities now are for humanitarian aid to reach the people of Gaza immediately and without obstruction, and including through the protection of aid convoys and safe corridors for medical and relief personnel. I was only listening this morning to Dr. Mohammed Abu Maghsib, who said he was very lucky because he managed to evacuate his family to Cairo. But when he was talking about the circumstances within which he lived and all the medics that are trying to operate in to save lives, we're bearing witness, and it's almost unbearable to listen to what's going on. And he spoke about the luxury that a loaf of bread is. So the cost of one loaf of bread, €5, and someone like a medic can't even afford it. So imagine the population, 80% of them living in extreme poverty. And he spoke, and I think it's important, that lived witness piece. He spoke about children crying in the tent because their families cannot provide milk or food, crying for hunger and crying, not being able to fall asleep because of the hunger. And then they're so cried out, they're absolutely wasted. Somebody that I know, Denise Goff, who's an actress that some of you may know, but I met her during the summer. And I know Denise and her family very well. And she went to Barcelona to see the flotilla off, and then she went to the West Bank and thankfully came back safely last week. But in talking to her, she spoke about, this is just a small example of the intimidation that people are suffering. She spoke about going into a bookshop called The Gateway in Jerusalem, which was always, a thriving bookshop, always full. While they were there, and again, this is lived experience, the owner was arrested and taken away for a few hours. But the following night, the bookshop was raided and all the books removed. So that type of intimidation is shocking, because when we don't have food and when we've very little hope, being able to turn to some type of inspiration from books themselves are absolutely, really, really important. And again, this is absolutely being denied. So, Minister, as I say, we appreciate you being here on behalf of all of the families, the distraught families, on behalf of all the children. And I'm conscious, I have my niece Stella with me today, who's doing her TY experience, and she has plans for the future, and she can talk about what she wants to do when she grows up. But the children in Gaza don't have a future. They don't have a chance for education. Many of them don't have a chance to live. And that was one of the messages, actually, that the ambassador said. She said, we just want our children to be able to go to school and to have opportunities and to be able to live their lives like my niece, like our sons and daughters, like our nieces and nephews. So I am going to hand over to my colleague, to Senator Coleman, but thank you for being here, for taking this, for being listening, and we know we have the full support of the Taoiseach and of the Taoiseach.
I will be seconding this motion with pride, and I am absolutely behind Senator O'Loughlin with her words today. To the Minister for coming here today. I couldn't agree more that yes, there are very pressing issues in our country today, but we cannot continue. We simply cannot ignore what is happening in Gaza, and we're seeing images and reports every day, families torn apart, children dying of hunger, entire neighbourhoods reduced to rubble. It represents an absolute outrage that none of us, as I said, can ignore anymore. What is happening before our eyes is definitely and undoubtedly war, but it's also famine. It's a collective punishment of an already desperate population in Gaza and in Palestine. And look, I am absolutely horrified. I've said this before. I've stood here saying, as a mother, as a former journalist, we have to take immediate action. The suffering that's being inflicted on the people of Gaza cannot can sustain it any longer. The United Nations Commission of Inquiry has found that Israel is committing genocide against Palestine. It's a stark and damning conclusion. It places a duty on every single one of us as legislators, as human beings, as mums and dads and brothers and sisters, to speak out and to act. This motion, as I wholeheartedly support, rightly calls for an immediate and lasting ceasefire, for humanitarian aid to flow freely and safely, and for the unconditional release of all hostages. Now, these are basic building blocks of the human decency that we need to provide, and for international law. And look, I'm proud that our government, and in particular my own party, Fianna Fáil, has shown a very consistent and very principled leadership throughout the crisis. Ireland formally recognised the State of Palestine in May of last year, standing with the international community in calling for a genuine two-state solution. We've consistently called at the UN, the EU, and at every forum available, every platform that we've spoken on, for the protection of the civilians, for access to humanitarian aid, and for an end to what we're seeing on a daily basis. We've always provided significant humanitarian support to the region, even as we continue to press for safe corridors and protection of all convoys. Our government has committed to legislation for the Occupied Territories Bill, following the International Court of Justice advisory opinion, and we're sending a clear signal that we will not allow economic support for illegal settlements. We have a proud tradition in this country of multilateral diplomacy and of peace building. And in this moment of, we will call, despair, because nobody can be looking at this right across the world and not be feeling despair and a certain amount of helplessness why people are turning to us for the answers and for the solutions. We have to use every single tool that's at our disposal to champion this international law, the humanitarian access, and of course the ultimate peace that we are all seeking. This motion, as you'll see today, it's much more about the words that are on the pieces of paper. It's about confirming our collective will that Ireland will not stand idly by while these children starve, while all these civilians are massacred. And it's about calling for the world to act, to join together, to recognise Palestine, to enforce that international law. And we need to create the conditions, started a long time ago, which are not being enacted for peace. So I support this motion wholeheartedly, and I urge all senators to do the same today. Go to Míle Mágat.
Thanks very much, Caoirleach. And can I welcome the Minister to the Chamber and thank him for being here for this very important debate. And can I thank my Fianna Fáil colleagues for putting forward this this bill here today. And I suppose, look, when you start first, and it's been said already, it's always important to acknowledge that what happened on October the 7th was wrong. It was outrageous. Over 2,000 people were murdered, hostages taken, and that was all done by a terrorist organisation, Hamas, and those hostages need to be released. But we need to see a ceasefire. And it's important to say that because it's true. But sometimes you see on international media that Irish politicians on all sides are portrayed as someone who doesn't recognise that what happened on 7th of October was wrong. But since then, over the last 2 years, the reaction that we've seen and the level of response from Israel for any fair-minded person in the world couldn't but be outraged by it. And as Senator O'Loughlin and Senator Cumm said, Ireland and the Irish people have led as a nation in their outrage. And I think there's a number of things that we have done as a country that are now being followed by other countries, which is very positive. Obviously, recognising Palestine as a state, recognising the ambassador now for Palestine in Ireland. We've seen recently that Canada, France, UK, and many others have started on that journey, which is incredibly positive, because obviously the more that come on board, the stronger that message is. Here as well, within our own committee, we worked hard over 2 or 3 months in the Foreign Affairs Committee on pre-legislative scrutiny on the Occupied Territories Bill. That needs to be legislated as soon as possible, and there was an awful lot of good work done on that. And again, I think that is something, just like we've seen with Ireland recognising Palestine as a state, I think by delivering on the Occupied Territories Bill, it gives the opportunity for other countries to follow Ireland's lead on it. And I think what's very heartening as well is more of the diplomacy behind the scenes in relation to the EU trade association agreement, because that's a very, very powerful tool against Israel, that if we can open up a conversation, even just opening up the conversation about reviewing that agreement with Israel, I think is very important. But what's happened in the last number of months in particular, but almost since October 7th, what's happened in Gaza is genocide, and that's been called out by Ireland from the very start. I think it's the images are just abhorrent, and I think we as a country need to be as vocal as we can in supporting the Palestinian people. In our Foreign Affairs Committee yesterday, we had John White from UNRWA, who was giving us an understanding of what it's like on the ground for workers from UNRWA and for the people of Palestine. And he was talking about the state of Palestine being the size of Louth, and essentially what you have at the moment now is 2.1 million people covering 18% of the Gaza area, and aid and food and medical supplies being blocked essentially by Israel from coming in to help those people. And we need to call that out. You couldn't but be emotionally impacted by the contribution by John White yesterday, in my view, if people have seen it. And him and their staff are so committed to trying their best to support the Palestinian people. Look, I think we have, as a country and as a state, done a number of significant things over the last number of months. But there's always more we can do. There's certainly more we can do here. There's certainly more we can do to convince, particularly some of our European colleagues and friends, to be able to stand up and call out this for what it really is, which is genocide, which is wrong, and which must stop. Thanks very much, Gaelic.
Joe Conway. I would like to just say a few words in relation to the support of this motion that's before the House today, this afternoon, and also to signal the widespread support of the Senate Independent Group for the sentiments and the thrust of the motion. I think the first thing that I'd like to say is just an observation that I would have in relation to the conflict as it erupted in October of 2023, and that is that it's so frequently before us in the media and television, in the newspapers and magazines, periodicals, that it's quite easy to find ourselves being slightly anaesthetised by the suffering and the horror of what's going on in Gaza. And I suppose that's just a humanity. It's something that is what the journalists consider or they describe as overkill, and we can get blinded or numb to the fact that so much of this is going on, and so much of the implications that we make on decent societies and governments goes with a bothered ear. And the essence, I think, of humanitarian crisis or humanitarian response is that it should be revolving around compassion, and just not just compassion as in verbally expressed, but compassion in action. Not alone do we feel that there is something wrong, but it's a human imperative to try to do something about it. And that's one of the things, as an Irish Republican, I'm very proud of the governments that we have had doing what they have been able to do in being leading lights in the advocacy of the people of Palestine and in their sufferings. And none more so than the government since the October outrage in perpetrated by the other side of the coin, I suppose, the Hamas raid on that section of bordering on Israel. Humanitarian help, to me, is an essential part of being morally, it's a difficult phrase, but being morally neutral. That there is no, what would you say, no proviso that you are considering your response to the humanitarian crisis by saying, if you do this, this should be the case. What we have in humanitarian aid and response is that it should be something that is without condition, that it's just self-evident as one human to another. And if there is an exigency in humanitarian sense anywhere, then it should be the responsibility of human beings everywhere to try to address this. It's part of our global solidarity as a Republican nation, I think. And of course, it shows an inherent respect that we have for international conventions, most noticeably the Geneva Convention, which tries to regulate the behavior of human beings in the execution of conflict or war or strife. And all of those things are to some extent falling down in the way I see the conflict and the crisis in Palestine over the last while. Because if you, I think I would describe myself as a full-blown insomniac. So it means that I lie awake a lot of the night listening to the BBC World Service. And no other station will give you a greater delineation of the mess that the world is in by outlining not just the conflict in Gaza, but the conflicts in Sudan or in the Democratic Republic of the Congo or natural disasters in various places, Afghanistan and Poland, Tibet. The list is endless, but what you wake up, if waking up is the proper expression in the morning, and you realize that the world is in a great state of chaos, and we are shockingly reluctant to address these things. And then it's made more manifestly awful that it's not just these, what we used to probably in a derogatory sense called third world countries. But a lot of this is bolstered by the fact that this humanitarian crisis in Israel or in Palestine is driven by the world's leading power and one of its major allies in the Middle East, Israel, and that's the United States. And that is a fundamentally shocking admission for us as people of the first world and who are in many ways very aligned to the United States. But we find ourselves shocked by the way that they have taken aid distribution, for example, away from the United Nations and given it to a fellow from the infidels, a fellow called Taz Mulford, who has a long history of Islamophobia. And he is the gatekeeper and the guard of the aid that has been given out, supposedly given out to the Palestinian helpless and hopeless. And I mean, what an inversion of morality and logic that is. So I have a few seconds left, so I just want to signal our group's manifest support for this and our support and admiration for the work done by the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach and the governments beforehand in speaking up for a section of humanity that has been poorly served by humanitarian response in times past, and we look forward to better times to come. Gurmagad the Kyle.
Gurmagad Anish on Shanador McCormick. Do you share?
Yes.
Senator Tully, 3 and 3?
Yeah, 93 and a half and something.
We'll give you injury time. We'll give you some injury time, all right. 3 and 3-ish.
Yes. So our spokesperson for Foreign Affairs is not here today. We have his empty chair here, so I feel quite a weight here and genuine fear for his safety. The Sinn Féin group have put their names to the amended motion as we don't feel Fianna Fáil's motion goes far enough on a few points. In particular, I want to mention the final amendment calling for a halting of transportation through Ireland and through Irish airspace of all weapons and dual-use items travelling to Israel for use by the military in Gaza and the West Bank. We cannot allow a situation that threatens our neutrality to continue. Concerns have consistently been raised about the use of Shannon Airport, and the government continue to ignore these concerns. As you all know, there is an aid flotilla trying desperately to make its way to Gaza, which was attacked by drones the other night. Yesterday, we woke up to the news that the humanitarian fleet of over 500 civilian volunteers was subjected to coordinated attacks in European waters off Crete. Drones, explosives and chemical dispersals targeted unarmed vessels, damaging ships and endangering lives. There are over 20 Irish civilians on board the boat in that flotilla, including our very own colleague, Senator Chris Andrews. Thankfully, we have been able to keep up communication with Chris, and I have spoke to him last night. The reports that the volunteers on the boats are safe for now. He did send me this statement to read on his behalf because he couldn't be here for this debate. He said, "The government should follow the example set by the Global Summit Flotilla by taking meaningful action in solidarity with the Palestinian people. After shamefully refusing to pass the Occupied Territories Bill or ban the sale of Israeli war bonds, it is pure hypocrisy for this government or its senators to claim to have stood up for the human rights of the Palestinian people. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are acting as if they are powerless spectators of this genocide, rather than a sovereign government with real options to hold Israel to account. The reality is that Ireland has done absolutely nothing to alleviate the man-made famine imposed upon Gaza and has completely failed to sanction Israel for its crimes. If Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael were serious about their support for Palestine, they would be doing everything they could to support the opening up of a humanitarian corridor to Gaza to end the starvation and the slaughter. The Global Summit Flotilla is doing what the Irish government and other governments should be doing, directly sending humanitarian aid to Gaza and confronting the Israeli regime. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael should be more concerned with ensuring that this flotilla and its aid reaches Gaza and its participants return safely home, rather than engaging in shallow self-praise." That was Chris's statement. I just want to say we acknowledge that the government has finally hardened its stance on Israel's genocide to some extent, but it did take a while. Remember, Francis Black's Occupied Territory Bill was first tabled in this House in 2018. That's 7 years ago, and it hasn't still been passed. You're still trying to water it down. I'm glad to see this motion debated here in the Seanad, but this motion is not strong enough, and I hope that the government parties will support the amendments.
Look, I welcome this motion, and there's nothing in it that I disagree with. I obviously welcome and want to see the amended version of the motion passed here today. It needs to be much stronger than it is. And while I welcome that Fianna Fáil are bringing forward this at this late stage, part of me is cynical and wondering, is this an effort to counteract your presidential candidate Jim Gavin's disgraceful remarks last week when he said it's unconscionable that the bombing is still taking place, when I would believe that the military objectives have probably been reached for that military campaign? What world is he living on? I mean, Israel have not engaged in a military campaign since 7th of October. And by the way, the 7th of October is not something that happened in a vacuum. This has been going on for over 77 years. But Israel have actually attacked Gaza indiscriminately. We have over 66,000 Palestinian people dead, most of them in Gaza. 20,000 of them are children. We've had journalists killed, academics, we've had medics killed, we've had humanitarian workers killed. It's been indiscriminate and nothing has happened. We have had people shot, children included, shot in the head. We have had buildings collapsed on people. We have had shrapnel injuries, and we do not they do not have the medical capacity to deal with these injuries in their hospitals there. They are short on aid and they are short on food. And Israel is just emboldened all of the time, and emboldened in particular by the support by the USA, and not just from Trump, although that has made it worse. Biden was no better when he was there. So I do welcome this motion, and I do welcome that the government has stood up and recognised the state of Palestine. I do welcome that more countries are doing so. I also welcome actions such as calling out not taking part in the Eurovision or other sporting events if Israel are part of it. But that is not enough to stop this genocide and this indiscriminate murder of a whole nation of people. So we need to see action. We need to see the Occupied Territories Bill passed straight away. And I want to send solidarity greetings to my colleague Chris Andrews on the flotilla and all of the others, but it should not be civilians that is doing that. It should be this government and other governments with them taking that action. Thank you.
Minister, do you want to come in?
It's been almost 2 years since the heinous terror attacks carried out by Hamas and other terrorist groups against Israel and Israeli people on the 7th of October 2023. The horror of these attacks remains imprinted on our minds. Murder, rape and general savagery was video recorded. Ireland has consistently and unequivocally condemned these attacks. They were absolutely disgraceful. As we approach this tragic milestone of 2 years, we think especially of the hostages still held by Hamas in Gaza and their families who desperately want them home. And Ireland calls for their immediate release. Hamas has brought nothing but death and destruction to the people of Israel and Palestine and has nothing to offer for the future of the people of Palestine. Israel's war in Gaza has now killed more than 65,000 Palestinians since October 2023. Entire cities have been razed to the ground. This is massive displacement, hunger and destitution. We see the horror play out every day on mobile phones, just the same on television screens. The cycle of violence has shocked and outraged the Irish people. It has shocked both houses of the Oireachtas and every single member of Humanitarian. The outrage at these policies of the Israeli government is shared across Europe and beyond, as ordinary people around the world ask how this suffering has continued for so long. Without a political horizon, the cycle of violence will continue. At the United Nations High-Level Week this week, addressing the situation in Gaza has been a core objective of the Taoiseach, Taoiseach and all other government representatives. Ireland has been at the forefront of the European and international debate, pushing for urgent action in the face of this appalling conflict. And indeed, yesterday there have been discussions at ambassador level at the Council table at the European Union to progress what has been proposed by Commission President von der Leyen 2 weeks ago. And Ireland continues again to be at the forefront of those conversations. The situation in Gaza and the West Bank has been and will continue to be a cornerstone of our foreign policy. For these reasons, the Government welcomes this debate and does not oppose the motion put forward by Fianna Fáil. And indeed, many of the amendments that are proposed are being worked on by the Government at the moment at European level. Many of them are being sought by the Government at European level. And our position on this conflict has been steadfast. Ireland's position has been steadfast. We've consistently called for a permanent, immediate ceasefire, the release of all hostages, and the unimpeded surge of humanitarian aid into and throughout Gaza at scale. The determination that famine is occurring in Gaza is harrowing. This is the first famine experienced in the Middle East. The determination that famine is occurring in Gaza is harrowing. This is the first famine experienced in the Middle East since monitoring began, and this is a man-made famine. We must demand adherence to international humanitarian law and hold those responsible to account. There can be no more double standards. Against this dire background, Israeli military operations in Gaza have intensified with massive destruction of buildings, relentless bombardment and hundreds of people killed while seeking aid. Earlier this month, the International Independent Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territory published a report concluding that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. And I do share the concerns that have been outlined by senators for the flotilla, consisting of people lawfully protesting the slaughter in Gaza, which was attacked by Israeli forces. I condemn the actions of the Israeli government in attacking unlawfully a lawful flotilla that is seeking to engage in peaceful activities on international waters. This is a breach of international law. And I have seen reports that Spain will join Italy in sending military warships to protect the international flotilla. And I do commend Spain and Italy for calling out the breaches of international law at play and enacting to protect those on board the flotilla. I'm very conscious that Senator Andrews is on the flotilla, and I fully acknowledge his sincerity and indeed the danger that he is in at the minute. I think we must be very, very conscious of that. It won't be possible, as we explained yesterday, for the Irish Government to send an observer boat to the flotilla because, as Minister O'Callaghan said yesterday, we're not a strong military power, and indeed we would be prohibited legally under the triple lock legislation. At least 20,000 children have now been killed in Gaza. Many more bodies lie beneath the rubble. We cannot stand idly by, and we must use all the levers at our disposal to respond to this crisis. And that's exactly what Ireland is doing. And we cannot lose sight of the situation in the West Bank. Since January, Israeli military operations have displaced at least 40,000 people, destroying homes, schools and civilian infrastructure. Almost 900 physical barriers and checkpoints permanently or intermittently restrict the movement of Palestinians every day. These barriers are the physical manifestation of the many ways in which Palestinians are being prevented from living ordinary lives, blocking people from getting to work, restricting children from getting to school, hampering access to hospitals and healthcare facilities, and making it difficult for families to visit each other. Since October 23, the Israeli government has approved 49 new settlements, compared with the annual average of 7 outposts in the nearly 3 decades before that. Each outpost further entrenches occupation, skews the demography, and restricts the viability and territorial contiguity of a future Palestinian state. The decision to approve plans for settlement construction in the so-called E1 area of the West Bank is particularly egregious and a violation of international law. It corrodes the very core of a potential Palestinian state. We cannot be blind to this reality. We must act. Earlier this month, the European Commission presented proposals to suspend certain trade-related provisions of the EU-Israel Association Agreement. These are matters that Ireland has been pushing for quite some time. There are also proposals for sanctions on Hamas, extremist ministers and violent settlers. And again, some of these matters are before us in amendments, and these matters were before the Council of Ministers at ambassador level yesterday. The Commission is also putting on hold bilateral support to Israel, with the exception of support to civil society and the Israeli Holocaust Memorial Institution. Ireland has welcomed these steps, looked for these steps, led the way in seeking these steps, and they are long overdue. In February 2024, together with Spain, Ireland wrote to the High Representative Callas requesting a review of Israel's human rights obligations under the Association Agreement. The dial is shifting, and the outrage of EU citizens across the bloc at the EU's inaction is finally being heard. And I think we must distinguish between the European Union and its institutions and the people there. The truth is that there is a dynamic, whether it's in the Parliament, whether it's in the Council Commission, that's at play. And I would strongly recommend to people, as I have done over the summer with counterparts in countries who don't hold the same view, is to talk to members of Parliament, your counterparts, in other parliaments in countries that are not as supportive as Ireland for these measures, to listen to why they're not supportive and maybe to persuade them as well. And this is something that I have been doing when talking to counterparts in certain countries across the European Union, to listen to why, but also then to understand why, and then for them to understand why we are making this particular case and why we have been making it strongly. But the dial is certainly shifting, and I'm picking that up in my own engagements at ministerial level, and I'm sure you would too if you engage with members of Parliament, as I'm sure you do. The European Union now has an opportunity to demonstrate to its international partners and crucially to our citizens that we are ready to stand up in the face of the catastrophic situation in Gaza, to stand up for core principles and respect for international law. Ireland is working to encourage fellow member states to support these proposals. The Taoiseach has called for the Council to be convened as a matter of urgency. We don't have time to wait. Ireland has been active in calling for the EU to undertake a detailed review of its compliance with the advisory opinion of the ICJ. We've been calling for this for some time and will continue to press for action. Ireland asks that the EU's analysis in this regard is shared by member states at the earliest opportunity. And we are working at international level and through the UN in pursuit of a ceasefire and hostage release deal and to address the critical situation in Gaza. Over the weekend, we welcomed the decision of the United Kingdom, Canada, Portugal and Australia to recognise the State of Palestine. During the UN high-level conference on the two-state solution on Monday, further announcements followed by France, Belgium, Luxembourg, Andorra, Malta, Monaco and San Marino. This means over 150 countries now recognise the State of Palestine. Ireland, of course, together with Spain, Norway and Slovenia, took this decision last year in recognition of the principle that Palestine should be able to vindicate the full rights of a state including self-determination, self-governance, territorial integrity and security, as well as recognising its own obligations under international law. These recent formal decisions to announce formal recognition of the State of Palestine come against the background of the intolerable humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in Gaza, the shrinking space for Palestinian life in the West Bank, and the need to inject fresh impetus into bringing about a just, lasting peace where Israelis and Palestinians can live side by side in two states, Israel and Palestine in peace, security and dignity. And we're using our voice at the UN since 1980, since, as Senator O'Loughlin said, Minister Brian Lenihan Sr. Since then, we're the first, and we're continuing to use that voice to pursue a sustainable, long-lasting peace for the two states of Israel and Palestine. The cycle of violence must be broken, and the political horizon must be in clear sight. A key issue is support for the Palestinian Authority, governing a Palestinian state. And I have to say, I was met by protesters last week, and they were among the people they were criticising, not just the Irish government and everybody else, but the Palestinian Authority. I was surprised to hear that. We do need to support their reform agenda. They're not perfect, but they need sustainable financing as well, including the release of revenues by Israel. The two-state solution is the most pragmatic, realistic and concrete path forward. It is the only way to build a future with two states living side by side in peace and security, and it can be achieved, and we believe it can, and that's why we've acted. We were an active participant at the UN High-Level Conference on the implementation of the two-state solution, which the Taoiseach attended on Monday. As co-chair of the working group of the conference alongside Turkey, Ireland was part of a core group of countries that negotiated the outcome document of the conference. The document was endorsed by 142 countries in a vote at the General Assembly on the 12th of September. So there is strong international support to press ahead with securing and implementing the two-state solution. We're also a member of the Global Alliance for the implementation of the two-state solution, and this is the follow-up vehicle to the work of the UN conference. We've been an active participant in the work of the Alliance over the past year. Meetings have taken place in Riyadh, Brussels, Oslo, Cairo and Rabat. The Taoiseach attended a meeting of the Global Alliance in New York yesterday and announced that Ireland will host a meeting of the Global Alliance in Dublin in the coming months. At that meeting, we will share some of our own experience of a successful peace process in Northern Ireland with relevance to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, including creating the appropriate conditions for a ceasefire and underlining the importance of civil society. Such international engagement reiterates Ireland's unwavering commitment to the vision of a two-state solution, where two democratic states, Israel and Palestine, live side by side in peace within secure and recognised borders, consistent with international law and relevant UN resolutions. It is that commitment to the two-state solution and to the upholding of international law that sees the government now advancing work on the commitment of the programme for government in relation to the banning of goods from illegal Israeli settlements. This is yet another area that Ireland has been to the forefront of, and I would like to take an opportunity to update the Seanad on the progress of that bill. In June, the government approved the general scheme. The Joint Committee subsequently held a number of hearings, received submissions, of course you know that, representing a range of views and perspectives. The committee has published its report. On behalf of the Taoiseach, we do thank the committee, some of you are here today, for the diligence and dedication. The general scheme delivered on the commitment of the programme for government to progress the legislation, and the main purpose of the bill now is to prohibit the importation of goods into the state from Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. A number of other EU member states have recently announced that they are also taking similar steps, and many of them are in direct contact with me and with the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach and our officials. They include Spain, Slovenia, Belgium and the Netherlands. And again, this issue was raised by some of those ambassadors at the meeting I referred to that took place yesterday in Brussels. So this is welcome. Our preference, though, is for robust action at EU level. That's exactly what we've been asked to do. And I've met my counterpart from the State of Palestine. It's exactly what she asked me to do, is to continue the pressure at international level, and we'll do that. We've recently welcomed a further 15 Palestinian people from Gaza. These individuals are part of a complex evacuation led by the Department of Foreign Affairs consular and regional embassy teams. Since the beginning of the crisis, the Department has supported the travel of more than 200 people from Gaza to Ireland. We welcome those people with open arms and hope that Ireland can be a place of respite. I want to acknowledge the successful cross-departmental cooperation in evacuating paediatric patients to Ireland to undergo medical treatment and care. And we did approve the evacuation of up to 30 sick children from Gaza. 2 successful medical evacuations have already been completed, and planning is underway for the third. Ireland has also provided over €95 million in support of the people of Palestine since January 2023. This includes €58 million to UNRWA, of which €20 million was provided in February 2025. Over €83 million of Ireland's support has been provided since October 2023, and over €29 million has been provided this year for the people of Palestine. Our support will not waver as we seek to establish a durable, sustainable peace for Israel and Palestine. And I wasn't going to raise the presidential election, but it was raised by the opposition. And Jim Gavin was, again, it's not relevant particularly to this debate, but Jim Gavin was criticised by the opposition. But I have to say, when we're talking about citizens in danger abroad, he's certainly the only presidential candidate who has direct experience of personally flying a plane to negotiate the release of Irish citizens abroad on a number of occasions, as well as giving extraordinary service on peacekeeping missions in Central Africa in terms of directly flying planes and trying to keep the peace. So I just have to say that in his defence, because I think completely unnecessarily criticised from the opposition benches, particularly when we have Irish citizens abroad, I would say, in some considerable danger on the flotilla that was mentioned. The government has consistently called for an immediate ceasefire, release of hostages held by Hamas, and a massive increase of humanitarian aid into Gaza, and will not rest until these objectives are achieved. As we approach the 2-year anniversary of the 7th of October, we must do more than call for peace. We must seize the opportunity to end the violence, end the destructive cycle of violence, and deliver on our commitments for lasting peace. We owe to many thousands of victims of this dreadful conflict to implement once and for all the two-state solution, which is in the interests of Israelis and Palestinians. Ireland will continue to work at EU and international level to do what we've been asked to do what is in our basic principles of our foreign policy since 1980, to drive this two-state agenda forward. And we'll continue to take measures at domestic level as we wait for an adequate international response. We don't lose hope. We owe that to our friends both Israel and in Palestine, and we will strive for a political horizon to stem this vicious cycle of violence.
Anish on Shanador, Tricia Stevenson. You're sharing time?
Sharing time and moving my amendment.
Wait, not yet, but you're sharing time what?
Nessa Cosgrove.
Nessa. Is it 3 and 3?
3 and 3.
That agreed? Agreed? Agreed. Right.
I firstly want to thank the Fianna Fáil senators for bringing forward this motion. We all know that the extermination of the Palestinian people has been relentless for almost 2 years, and we must do everything that we can, and we must do it now. I was gladdened to hear the Minister mention the Occupied Territories Bill. However, he didn't actually mention the committee report recommendations, which included services, and he only mentioned goods. And I hope that isn't a sign of things to come when it is introduced back into the Houses. I wish to speak on my amendments today, and my amendments only seek to strengthen the motion and ensure that it reflects the full reality of what's happening in Palestine today. I travelled to the West Bank earlier this month, and I saw firsthand the impact of the illegal settlement expansion, the daily intimidation, the daily violence faced by Palestinian communities, and the systematic denial of their basic rights, their basic human rights. And these aren't isolated incidences. They are very much part of an entrenched system, a system which has been there for decades, and a system of apartheid. And these practices have very much escalated exponentially, which we actually heard from the Minister himself. He gave some statistics around that. They've escalated since October 2023. And what we're seeing is Israel using the cloak of Gaza, the horrendous, horrific genocide in Gaza, to further their extreme expansionist ideology in the West Bank. And this is done with violence, settler violence. It is increasing. It's increasing with impunity. And communities are being displaced in clear violation of international law. And this is inextricably linked to what is happening in Gaza, which is why I introduced my amendments. My amendments are designed to reflect these realities. They call for sanctions on those responsible for the genocide in Gaza, but also the violent occupation and apartheid in the West Bank, both of the Israeli government ministers and of violent settlers. The amendments call for an end to the transport of weapons through Ireland that are used in these atrocities, and they also ground our support specifically for the settlement trade ban in the July 2024 ICJ ruling, reinforcing that this isn't just about political choice, it is actually a legal obligation that we seek to do these things. And I've said many times in this chamber that Ireland has a proud tradition of standing on the right side of international law and human rights, and if we fail to act, we will lose that tradition. We can't just always hark back on the past, we must be implementing it now. In my last minute, I'll just touch on things we've heard already. We have the complete incursion and the attacks on civilians in Crete, in international waters, by Israeli forces with drone strikes. That is such a breach of international law. Well, it's breach after breach of international law, but it is another thing that Israel seem to believe they can do with complete impunity. The incursions on Gaza City, Senator Hearn mentioned previously that we heard from UNRWA, John White, the Deputy Director, where he gave us a horrific detailing at the Foreign Affairs Committee of the state of things in Gaza City. As winter comes on Gaza, we are going to see cholera, we're going to see infectious diseases and more deaths. And people are making the decision just to stay in their homes and wait while the tanks come because there's nowhere else to go. And then we have the E1 plan in the West Bank, a plan which once upon a time, 30 years ago, was a red line for Clinton, it was a red line for the US, and the Israelis are currently implementing it. They're saying that they're only implementing it as a consequence of all of the states recognising Palestinian statehood. That is not the fact. They have been doing this for months. All of these actions, they represent impunity, the impunity of the Israeli state, and we have to say enough is enough. If we don't do it now, then we lose all sense of international law and order, and one day that will come back to bite us. International law and order only exists because we believe in it. It only exists because we implement it. And if we don't implement it for Gaza, one day, whether that be in Ireland, Europe, the global north, we will rely on international law, and it won't be there to protect us. Thank you.
Moving the amendment.
I move the amendment.
Seconded the amendment by Senator Anish. Senator Cosgrove.
And I too welcome the Fianna Fáil motion, and I also welcome the government that they're adding to it, that they're supporting it, but I'm going to speak on the amendments actually as well. And we've seen, I suppose the report, the UN Independent Commission report has said that Israel has shown a clear intent to establish permanent control over Gaza while ensuring a Jewish majority in the West Bank. So I too was in the West Bank 20 years ago, and I could see the Commission at that stage, land confiscation, population displacement and discrimination and apartheid was existing at that time, and it has accelerated since October 7th. We have recognised the state of Palestine, and I'm so welcome that Ireland is one of the first leading countries to do this, which has been followed by France, Britain, Canada and Australia. But now that we have, it's our responsibility now to focus our attention not only on Gaza, but also on the West Bank. A day ago, the Al-Karma crossing, or the Allenby crossing in the West Bank, is the only link to the rest of the world. It borders Jordan to the east and is the lung of the West Bank, enabling movement of people and vital goods. Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu has closed the crossing indefinitely. So 3 million Palestinian people rely on this Al-Karma crossing. While its genocide continues in Gaza, Israel is now laying siege to the people in the West Bank, and it's turning it in now to a large sealed prison. So I'm urging that we keep this to the forefront. The Palestinian Minister of Foreign Affairs, their experts, their embassies and ministers around the world are demanding mobilisation of international pressure, and that we actually keep this. I would encourage this motion. That's why we wanted to bring in these amendments, to keep not only to keep the focus on Gaza, because we know that Israel's ultimate game is to take control of the whole of Palestine, the state that they don't even recognise. But I think we need to keep West Bank very much on the forefront as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to those putting forward the motion. I'll be happy to support it, and I think it sets out some important recognitions in terms of the horror of the war and the imposed famine, and indeed the fact that the United Nations Commission has been very explicit that this is genocide, something we've all seen, and most experts have told us for a very long time. And crucially, the idea that international law should be applied equally to all. I think there's some important key points. But I think there's maybe something more that needs to be added in just a couple of areas. And I know that the motion is by its nature what is negotiated, but I think it's important to mark some of the places where I think we need to be clearer and stronger. And I would just maybe, as I think it's important to have maybe a little correction. It's a small piece, but in terms of the humanitarian side of things, just to be very clear in relation to the flotilla, it was suggested by the minister who was previously here that somehow, the triple lock stops us from playing a role. Let's be explicitly clear, it does not. In supporting that, the 2006 Defence Act, Section 3, Part F, explicitly allows the deployment for undertaking humanitarian tasks in response to actual or potential disasters or emergencies. So it's very important that I think disingenuous to suggest somehow acting in a humanitarian way that's something that gets held back. And the way I find it frustrating is because there are many things that Ireland can do that nobody is stopping it doing, not that, not others, which it is still not doing. And again, while this is really good to see, the call on the government to use its diplomatic voice at the UN and at the EU, let's talk about our actions and what is available to us as actions. So back on the humanitarian side, there's congratulations on the substantial humanitarian assistance. 200 people, that's all. 200 people is what we have taken from Gaza, a killing field. And we know that there are cases, I don't like to go into individuals, but there are 10 families who are waiting on reunification with their children here in Ireland. There are, in one of those cases, a woman accompanied her 6-year-old child, but forced to leave 3 other children, 8, 12 and 14, with no parent in Gaza, choosing between her youngest child's survival and now she hasn't heard from those children in over a week. Why are we not giving the basics of reunification, of bringing full families here? That might be substantial. Anybody who we have a solid reason, and again, as of course she is now stamped for refugee and entitled to refugee and entitled to be granted, where there is mechanisms in place, let's be using them and not trying to do the least possible. Because be clear, if there's any attempt to appeal to the public on this, look, we've got a hard line in immigration, this isn't a place to be applying it. 200 is small. Incidentally, 95 million is not that much either when we look to what we've given in other situations and we look at the extent of the need. But the crucial piece here are the lives and families that could be saved. But then going to the other parts of this, on humanitarian piece, we can do more for the flotilla. The triple lock or anything else isn't stopping us. We can do more in terms of the lives and families. Each one precious, each one bringing something extraordinary from their experience. And particularly I'm thinking of the students, the very small number of students, I think 50 or 60 in total who have come to Ireland. I mean, but to have pursued their goals to such a degree and to be bringing ideas for the future out of a place of such awful dystopia. These are incredible people and we should be looking to support more of them and support their families, so that they can focus on the future and not, as many of these students I know, be engaged in desperate phone calls to their younger siblings to see if they are still alive day by day. But on the other side of it, the flow of money and the flow of arms, we have to be really honest on this. The flow of words is fine. Recognition is fine. But we need to be a little bit clear on that. I think some people think that, we were the first to recognise. Ireland was the 142nd country in the world to recognise the state of Palestine. Everyone recognised Palestine except Europe, partly due to Europe's long-term economic and historic and other ties with Israel and its refusal to challenge Israel and its contribution to impunity and its words about the two-state solution while purposely refusing to recognise one of the states in the mix. So Ireland was good because it got Europe moving, even though it wasn't the first within Europe, but it again, was moved forward for Europe. But let's be clear, recognising the state of Palestine isn't the game changer. That's us repairing damage for something Europe should have done ages ago and didn't do. And that's not enough to move the dial within the UN. What needs to happen, and this is where is the kinds of things that the Hague Group are putting forward. The Hague Group is a group of states from right across the world that Ireland should be signing up to and joining, who say, we stand by international law and its universal application, and we are going to apply it in all of these concrete ways, including ways, for example, such as shipping controls, such as actually stopping military transit. And when we talk about that Commission report that's quoted in the motion, that Commission report explicitly calls for an end to the transfer of arms and other equipment or items where there is reason to support their use in military operations that could support the commission of genocide. We heard from UNRWA in the Foreign Affairs Committee this week about the robot tanks that are demolishing neighbourhoods, entire neighbourhoods, from the comfortable distance for those who operate them, mowing down the overcrowded, desperate neighbourhoods of Gaza City with robot tanks. So this is the elephant in the room for Ireland. Let's talk about the technologies, and let's be honest about the fact that dual-use goods, that's dual-use goods, it sounds soft, goods that can be used for military purposes have been massively escalated. I think it's 113 million in exports. We've seen a massive export in those technologies from Ireland to Israel, which are used in the machinery of war, be it the algorithms that track people home to their houses to be killed there. That technology, those dual-use goods, we have control over their exports, and we need to make the honest peace on that. Finally, I will finish on 2 points. The central bank bonds. That's the real flow of money. And again, the central bank has ignored a committee which called for a review in terms of international law, and has instead tried to pass the buck to Luxembourg and say, we're still going to approve these, these Israeli bonds literally used to fund the war and the occupation, and we are going to have those funded, but we'll locate them in Luxembourg. And I will just tell you, I've talked to Luxembourg parliamentarians, they're not happy about that either. And then finally, the Occupied Territories Bill, if it does not include services, it is not fulfilling the International Court of Justice advisory opinion, which is explicitly clear on the obligation to prevent trade or investment relations that contribute to the maintenance of the illegal situation. That, the committee were clear, the Foreign Affairs Committee, that means goods and services. And the government need to hear that message. They should listen to the Finance Committee, who say international law is at risk in the central bank's actions. They should listen to the Foreign Affairs Committee, who are telling them we need goods and services. And they should listen to the people of Ireland, and indeed the members here, who I know feel passionately about this, and act quickly and effectively. Meaningful action, not just words. Thank you.
Mary Fitzpatrick.
And thank you, Minister, for being here for this important debate. An ounce of action is, of course, worth a ton of talk, and no amount of talking, no amount of emotion, no amount of wishing things to be otherwise is going to change anything in Gaza today. The horrors they defy description. They defy our words. It truly is a failure of humanity in its rawest form. To think about it, it's to think of a post-apocalyptic environment. And we all share the disgust and the horror. And I do, of course, commend government. I do, of course, commend opposition. I do, of course, commend everybody in our country who has used their time, their energy, their resources to try and champion a solution. And it's soul-destroying. It is soul-destroying to see the continued action in Gaza to destroy human life in its every sense. It is truly unbearable to think about. I want to thank the other Shanadori for supporting this motion, and for government for accepting the motion. And for my minute or two, I want to encourage you, Minister, as a member of government, to go back to government and to ensure that our government does continue to use every resource available to this state to champion a solution, to champion a ceasefire, to champion a release of the hostages, and to champion provision of humanitarian aid. And don't be distracted by the cheap politics of others, or don't be distracted by others who will criticise and undermine and will seek to besmirch or devalue your efforts. You don't have a magic wand, but you do have the authority of government, and you do have the authority to act on behalf of the people of Ireland. And as this government has been doing, I urge you to continue to do that. Because while we are a small island, and while we are a small nation, and while our actions are wholly inadequate and cannot bring an end to the horror in Gaza, we do have influence, and our influence is working, and our influence is most effective when we influence our international partners, our European partners, our international partners, and we must keep going. We must take courage and resolve from the courage of the people in Gaza. 2 million people, more than 2 million people, most of them young people, most of them very young people, women and children and men that are being pummeled in every description. So, Minister, I thank you for your time today, and I thank you for accepting our motion. Gur Magath.
Míle mágad a níis an Seanadóir Gar Kelleher.
Gurh míle mágad a chahirirlig agus bhhailm fáilte chuirimh na Aristáid Smith a socht teach a chóchlacathe chuirim fáilte rib an rún atá ósár gór tránána inniuh ó Henadóirí in na fáil. Is táchta chun rud é gachíireacht gur féidir ling a dhéanamh ón tír seo, teacht é réiteach an gcaoilint sa bhean éithir agus deire a chur leis an goga. In response to the unspeakable murder by Hamas of almost 1,200 innocent Israeli people and foreign nationals, and the taking hostage of over 250 others on the 7th of October 2023, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, stated that his objective and that of the Israeli government was to destroy Hamas. After almost 2 years of relentless bombing and killing, the destruction of virtually all infrastructure in Gaza, and the starvation of the Palestinian people, we ask the simple question, when will it all end? Because of the nebulous and undefined nature of Netanyahu's government's objective, it appears that what quickly became very much a one-sided war will go on indefinitely. On Friday last, I met with Habib al-Ostaz and his brother Ramzi in Cork to discuss the enormity of the issues being faced by their family in Gaza on a daily basis. Both of the young men are in their 20s. Understandably, Habib was very downhearted. I tried to lift his spirits by referring to the then impending news of new countries indicating that they would formally recognise the state of Palestine. Habib politely told me that he didn't care. He simply wants the war to end and for his family to be safe. He had just received the news the previous day that his first cousin had been killed by an Israeli drone attack. He abhors Hamas and sees no role for them in Palestine's future. As Minister Byrne stated, to date, more than 65,000 Palestinian people have been killed by Israel, including over 20,000 children. Habib and Ramzi have a younger brother in Gaza who is 5 years old. I have a young son at home who's 5 years old, and his primary concerns are building on the friendships that he's starting in junior infants, and whether Bukayo Saka will be fit to play at the weekend. Entirely different concerns to the young 5-year-old boy in Gaza. As elected representatives in Ireland, we find ourselves asking, what more can we do to help bring about an end to the war and to help create a better and more hopeful future for Palestine, Israel, and all of the Middle East? In this regard, I think that the importance of working with our international partners cannot be overstated. In the absence of strong, disinterested and impartial international leadership from some of the world's larger countries, I believe that the EU must look to take a more central role on the international stage. John Hume once described the European Union as the best example of conflict resolution in the history of the world. A little over 5 years after the passing of one of Ireland's greatest ever people, the time has come for the EU to play its part in helping to bring the war to an end. I welcome the fact that to date, 157 of the 193 United Nations member states have formally recognised the State of Palestine, including the UK and almost half of the EU member states. Ireland needs to continue to work with our international partners to encourage more countries to do the same. I also welcome the finding that the UN Special Committee I welcome the UN Special Committee's finding that Israel's warfare methods in Gaza are consistent with genocide, including the use of starvation as a weapon of war. However, the power of the United Nations to make a strong and more meaningful intervention is hindered by the continued use of vetoes by some member states. Therefore, I believe that Ireland's diplomatic efforts should continue to be focused more on persuading fellow EU member states to do more and the EU as a whole to do more, including stronger sanctions and a ban on the exportations of arms for the duration of war. And very briefly, in the time that I have left, I'd like to once again state my concern about the ongoing use of the IHRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition on anti-Semitism, which I believe should be looked upon more critically. It's accepted internationally in the European Union and was referenced in Ireland's programme for government. But I think that this is something that should be looked at again. And on that note, I conclude my remarks.
We're on Shane, no, Paul Daly.
Garmagok Hirlik, and I think Senator Keller just really, portrayed an aspect. I'm also an Arsenal fan, and you made me think. I'm wondering, is Saka fit for the weekend too? And then it makes you wonder, how would you be wondering or worrying about something so unimportant in the big picture that is what's going on in Gaza? But I think you put it very well. And from the outset, and not as a senator, not as a public representative, as a human being, I've been horrified from the very attack by Hamas, which I condemned. But then two wrongs don't make a right. Hamas were wrong. It never should have happened. But the overreaction of Israel and Netanyahu, as I said, two wrongs don't mean a right. We've said it, everybody has said it, it's genocide. And I raise it continually with the people in power, or in more powerful positions than myself, as to why we're not doing more. I acknowledge today's motion, and I also acknowledge the fact that as a government, we have led from the front. And yes, I ask the questions. I always say, why can't we do more? When you ask at a meeting, why aren't we doing more? We're doing a lot. We've done more than many others. But then you go home and you put on the news and you see what's going on. And as a human being, you wouldn't be human if you felt like we need to do more. We're not doing enough. We're not having the desired effect. What we're doing is not having the desired effect. But we have to keep doing it. And I compliment the government for what they've done. I compliment my colleagues who put the motion together here today. I strongly support it. I also compliment Senators Stevenson, Harman, Cosgrave and Noonan for that work they put into the amendments to strengthen today's motion. I have to also take the opportunity to berate Sinn Féin for the attitude that was taken here today in playing politics as usual and just trying to score points. I send my very best wishes to their colleague, Senator Andrews, on the flotilla. I condemn what is happening to that flotilla, and I wish him every good luck in his journey and hope he comes home safely. But I cannot sit here and listen to politics as the same point scoring. Everyone else I commend in the chamber whose heart is in the right place and who really wants the best and quickest solution to the problem that we have. But to stand up and tried to score political points just shows how genuine you are on the topic. And I think that's even reiterated more by the fact that I'm looking over at empty chairs. They didn't even stay for the duration of the debate. We cannot play politics as usual with this issue. We all genuinely believe what I've just said and what everyone else here, bar a couple, have said today. And that's we have to keep pushing for more. As I say, I'm repeating myself and I conclude on this. We have done a lot. It may not look it from the outside in. We've boxed above our weight. We've led Europe. We now have other countries beginning to come to our way of thinking. And that has to be commended, that we were out there first. But I will say what I keep saying. I know there needs to be more done. And I know the consequences of all we have done are not enough and are not acceptable. But we have to be genuine in this, and we cannot play politics with this issue as was done here today. Garamagad Kirlik.
On Shanador Shane Curley.
Garamagad Kirlik. I think at the outset it's important to acknowledge that what happened on the 7th of October was a complete atrocity. I think what happened afterwards by the IDF has been quite rightly designated as a genocide. I have a real issue with the fact that many prescribed terrorist groups around the world quite easily achieve the status of being designated a terrorist group when we see what the IDF are doing. And I think that needs to be acknowledged in this chamber, and it does trouble me to see the images coming out of Gaza and what's happening, and it's extremely emotive. I was in the University of Galway last week, and a Palestinian girl signed up to the youth wing of my political party, and I had a really long conversation with her, and it was just really, really tough. I think we have a huge amount of work to do as a nation to try and help the people of Gaza in the aftermath of this, when the generations of trauma come out of this. I think that's where our biggest role will be. I do want to pick up on something Senator McCormick said earlier about the flotilla shouldn't be doing the work we should be. I think it's something we need to discuss. My granduncle was a proud servant in the Navy, and the thoughts of sending our Navy with the equipment they have over there, I'm not sure what sense there is in that. And I think that's something we need to really be mature about when we have these conversations. To create humanitarian corridors in Gaza with our defence forces, how do we do that without changing the triple lock? I'm just asking that conversation to take place properly. And I think we need to start having more mature conversations about this when we're discussing the Gaza issue. It's completely atrocious. What the IDF is doing is genocide. Everybody agrees on that. But there needs to be a more mature conversation in some of the details of what we're discussing in this chamber. Gurmil Mogad.
Garamagad Nish, the proposer, to respond on the motion.
Okay. Thank you very much, Cathaoirleach. Thank you, Minister, for your compassion, for your understanding, for supporting the motion. I want to thank all of my colleagues for being part of this motion, for delivering, for supporting it. And I want to commend the opposition as well. We are all on the same page. We're not on opposite sides. We want to do our very, very best as legislators in this country and as a nation to support those that are displaced from Palestine, those that are bereft with grief, and those that are still undergoing incredible onslaught. I do want to address the point that Sinn Féin made. Yes, Fianna Fáil do have a candidate. We have a very fine one. And his experience needs to be highlighted in relation to the UN mission in Chad, because this does talk about his international credentials. That mission was established in response to atrocities and the refugee crisis coming from Darfur and Sudan, something I know about because one of my sisters, Noelle, was a volunteer there for 12 months at the same time with Médecins Sans Frontières. And his role in leading the mission there was to protect civilians, facilitate humanitarian aid and support human rights. And that all served to emphasise his credentials around leadership, around global engagement, and about doing the right thing. So how dare Sinn Féin try to use this platform to try to besmirch a good man that we're certainly proud to have as a candidate. Chris Andrews was also mentioned, and we certainly send our support to him. We are very concerned by developments that have happened in relation to the global flotilla. It's absolutely not acceptable, and it is an absolute clear breach of international law. I know that the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach have taken this up with the EU High Representatives and with Kaja Kallas and with other counterparts in New York over the last few days. But we wish everybody, we wish Senator Andrews and all of those that are involved in the flotilla the very best. We want to see them all home safely. So the motion stands on its merits. I think we've had good engagement and we've had a number of amendments put in place. And with continued negotiation, we, within this party and on this side of the House, accept amendments 1, 2, 3 and 4. And we do believe that it will strengthen our motion. And we're happy to accept that in the absolute spirit of collaboration and cooperation that we all need to have and to show in relation to humanitarian crises such as this. And I know that all sides of the House showed that same level of collaboration in relation to the motion that Senator McDougall had before the House. And I really hope that when it comes to issues such as this, that we can continue in a spirit of collaboration and cooperation. But thank you for putting your time and your energy, and I know that you feel as absolutely strongly as we do. And other points were made that we've taken on board. I know that Minister Byrne is taken on board in relation to going back to the Taoiseach in terms of foreign affairs and bringing back to Cabinet as well too. But I think that we should all hold our heads high in terms of what we're all doing, both on the government side and on the opposition benches, to try to highlight what we can and to raise this everywhere we can with our counterparts across Europe and across the world. And we used our time yesterday in Brussels to highlight this everywhere that we could. So it just remains to me to commend the motion as amended with amendments 1 to 4 and to put those in front of the House. Gaurav Mahagat.